No, this is a deeply unsettling parable that Jesus tells, isn't it? I feel so uncomfortable reading these words, imagining them coming out of Jesus' mouth. I imagine that you feel pretty uncomfortable too. This doesn't sound like the Jesus that we have made in our image, the watered-down, passive Jesus who says that as long as you believe the right things, you can avoid hell. This parable reminds us that Jesus did not, in fact, come to make sure that we give lip service to the right doctrines and to the bare minimum of not evilness in order to get into heaven. No, in this parable, we are confronted with the real Jesus, the tangible, radical God in the flesh that Luke wants us to know. This is the Jesus who brings good news to all, not to the privileged and the powerful alone, but to the poor and the meek, the invisible and the unimportant. This is the real Jesus, not the Jesus who wants to see us get into heaven, but the Jesus who wants to teach us how to bring heaven to earth, into our homes, into our neighborhoods, into our communities, into our churches, into the whole world. That's why this parable makes me squirm. I want to rush past it. I want to explain it away. Because ultimately, I know when I read this parable that I am not Lazarus. I am the nameless rich man. I am the nameless rich man because I am absurdly wealthy. Compared to nearly all of humanity throughout all of human history, all of us in this room are in the tiniest fraction of the wealthiest people who have ever lived. But that is not the main reason that we are the rich man. I am the nameless rich man because I consume far more than I need with little regard to how it affects other people or creation. Once we even begin to scratch the surface of how our clothes are made or how our food is produced or what happens to all the plastic we use one time and then throw away, it becomes pretty obvious that we are far more consumeristic than anyone in the first century could have imagined. But that too is not the main reason that we are the rich man. I am the nameless rich man because I turn a blind eye to all of the suffering and poverty that exists right before my eyes. Skimming news headlines for just a few seconds, none of us can deny that creation is groaning for liberation. But neither is this the main reason that we are the rich man. The main reason that I am the rich man, the main reason that we are all the rich man, is because we are far more interested in hoarding the blessings of the kingdom of God for ourselves than in actually bringing the kingdom of God into the lives of our neighbors and our enemies. A few chapters before this parable, Jesus taught his followers about loving our enemies. At the end of this passage in Luke 6, Jesus gave us this short command that we have come to know as the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Volumes upon volumes have been written about how to live in a Christ-like way, but despite all those pages and words, this single sentence remains the best summary of what it looks like to love your neighbor and to live the good news that Jesus proclaimed. The kingdom of God is at hand. In this parable, we see the rich man substituting the golden rule for the far easier and less offensive silver rule. Do not do unto others as you would have them not do unto you. The rich man didn't hurt Lazarus. He didn't even shoo Lazarus away. And I bet the rich man congratulated himself on his charity and righteousness, because at least he didn't increase Lazarus' suffering. What Lazarus would have had the rich man do unto Lazarus was pretty simple: to allow him to eat the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. What Jesus would have the rich man do unto Lazarus was also pretty simple, but far more offensive: for the rich man to welcome Lazarus to the table. That's why this parable makes us squirm. It speaks to how we substitute Jesus' radical love for less offensive truisms that allow us to just believe that the kingdom of God exists somewhere, instead of actually trying to live like Jesus has already unleashed the kingdom of God among us. I believe Jesus told this parable to lament all of the ways humans hoard their wealth and power. I believe Jesus told this parable to warn us against greed and selfishness. And I believe Jesus used this hyperbolic image of Hades to highlight the lesson that he is teaching us. And I believe that lesson is this: Both before and after the deaths of Lazarus and the rich man, Jesus makes it a point to mention the things that are separating the two men. Before death, it is the gate. Lazarus lay suffering outside the gate, unable to cross the divide separating him from the rich man and all of his riches. The rich man sat inside the gate. He had the power to cross the divide, but instead he kept himself separate from Lazarus, enjoying good things to the neglect of his neighbor. After death, it is this great impassable chasm separating heaven from Hades. This time the divide is permanent. No one can cross it, neither Lazarus nor the rich man, even if they wanted to. The rich man wants to warn his brothers so that they can avoid hell. But Abraham corrects him by saying that all of Israel's history, all of human history, testifies to the suffering and isolation that inevitably results when we choose to separate ourselves from God and our neighbor. Jesus uses this parable to warn us against the barriers we make between each other because of selfishness, greed, tribalism, arrogance, and fear of scarcity. The more we separate ourselves from others, the more difficult it becomes to break down the barriers, to climb over the walls, to cross the great chasms. And the more we separate ourselves from other humans, the more we separate ourselves from the God who created them. This parable makes us squirm because Luke brings us face to face with the God incarnate whose good news is not exclusively for you and me, it is for us and them. In Luke's language, the good news is for the sick, the poor, the woman, the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. If we were to update those terms for our time and place, the good news is for those who are experiencing homelessness and drug addiction and undocumented status. This parable is good news for those who are climate refugees and seeking asylum for persecution and fleeing gang violence. This parable is good news for those who have survived sex trafficking and domestic abuse and war. If this parable is for them, then it is for us too, because it condemns all the barriers we create between each other, all the barriers that isolate and torment us all. Certainly, Lazarus missed out on being in relationship with the rich man, but it is equally tragic that the rich man missed out on being in relationship with Lazarus and all of the things that Lazarus had to offer. When Nate and I were living in Uganda this past year, we hung out with a lot of short-term visitors who came to learn about the nonprofit we were working for, Kibo Group. We found that there are two levels of discovery that people make when they travel to developing countries. The first level a visitor usually reaches by day 2 or 3 is a deeper sense of gratitude for what they have. After visiting with Ugandans in rural villages, these visitors learn to not take running water or education for granted. And they went back home mostly feeling relieved to have been born where they were born. Gratitude is a great thing to learn, and all of us can benefit from having more of it in our lives. But if visitors you stayed for a week or more, then they would usually pass through gratitude for what they have and come to a deep sense of lament for what they lack. The more they experienced rural villages and spent time with Ugandans, the more they noticed all of the things lacking in their own lives that these impoverished Ugandans enjoyed. What they always talked about was the profound sense of community and belonging that they observed among people in the village. The visitors would begin to wonder why they felt so lonely and depressed back at home, even amidst all the things that they enjoyed. If a visitor stayed a really long time, 3 or 4 weeks or more, then they might start to make connections between the things they have and the things they lack. The more things we own, the more we have to do to protect those things, which means creating physical barriers to keep people out of our space, like a gate around our house or a wall around our country. The more opportunities we have, the more we have to do to keep our competitive edge, which means creating social and cultural barriers to keep people out of our league. We spend a lot of time constructing all kinds of barriers around ourselves. And what we end up with is a handmade hell of isolation. But loneliness is a familiar hell, so at least it's a comfortable agony. This parable is terrifying because it reminds us that the kingdom of God, on the other hand, has no barriers. It is open and welcoming to everyone. Jesus wants us to move beyond the belief that heaven exists somewhere above our heads and beyond our present. And Jesus wants us instead to live like we believe him when he says that the kingdom of God is here among us now. When we do, when we shun the silver rule and embrace the golden rule, without fear, we share in the good life of love and unity and compassion and abundance. When we truly do unto others as we would have them do unto us, not because we're afraid of hell, but because we love God and love others as ourselves, that's when we help Jesus bring the kingdom of God to earth. The rich man preferred the safe isolation of himself and his riches over the scary, abundant, uncomfortable, beautiful community that is the kingdom of God. Which one are we choosing?